I never thought I would find myself in such a situation. My life always seemed predictable and calm, but looking back, I realized that it was only a superficial sense of stability. Sometimes we need to shake ourselves up to understand what we really want from life. My story is a journey along the thin line between duty and temptation, between what we should do and what we desperately want. I have been married to Dexter for 7 years. Our marriage could be called successful. We had a home in a quiet suburb of Connecticut, where everyone knew each other, jobs, and an established circle of friends. Dexter is a reliable, caring, and balanced person, but over time I began to notice that our life lacked a spark, the same spark that once led us to the altar. At the beginning of summer, Zane, Dexter's nephew, came to visit us. It was his first visit since starting college, and he planned to spend the whole vacation with us. Zane was young, energetic, and full of life. He brought a fresh breeze with him that soon filled every corner of our home. From the very start, I noticed how easily and effortlessly he communicated with people. Zane was like a magnet attracting the attention of everyone around. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and a charming smile that he was not shy about showing. His confidence and charm immediately impressed me. It was nothing like what I felt when I was with Dexter. Zane and I talked a lot. He had many interesting stories about college, friends, and hobbies. I found myself eagerly waiting for the opportunity to talk to him again. He was lively, spontaneous, and in his company, I felt free from all the responsibilities and expectations that weighed on me as a wife and housekeeper. Gradually, our conversations became more personal. He began to share his dreams and fears, and I felt that a special connection was forming between us. This connection was gentle and effortless, but it became more tangible with each passing day. I noticed that Zane often held his gaze on me a little longer than necessary. It was pleasant and frightening at the same time. One day, when we were alone in the kitchen, I caught him watching me. His gaze was full of curiosity and something else that I couldn't immediately recognize. He smiled at me, and that smile awakened forgotten feelings in me. I felt my heart start to beat faster. "You are amazing, Allison," he said once when we were discussing his plans for the future. These were simple words, but they stuck in my head. I knew I shouldn't have given them much thought, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind them. Our meetings in the kitchen became regular. We discussed everything, from the weather to the meaning of life, and every time he entered the room, I couldn't help but feel the air between us charged with something invisible but tangible. I began to notice how I sought his presence. Every morning when I went down to the kitchen, I hoped he would be there. We drank coffee and chatted about trivial things, but even in those moments, I felt something more than just friendly attachment. It was an elusive attraction that couldn't be explained in words. Gradually, I began to notice that Zane felt this attraction too. He often appeared nearby when I was doing household chores or working in the garden. We joked, laughed, and there was an ease between us that was unfamiliar to me. Every time he looked at me with his dark eyes, I felt something flip inside me. This feeling was new and frightening, but it was also incredibly exciting. I knew I should keep my distance, but my heart seemed to have its own plans. One quiet evening, when Dexter was late at work, Zane and I decided to take a walk to the lake. It was our favorite place where we often discussed our dreams and hopes. That evening, the moon was particularly bright, and its light reflected on the water, creating a magical atmosphere. We sat on the shore for a long time, talking about life. At some point, he leaned towards me and said, "I'm glad I have the opportunity to spend this time with you." His words were simple, but I felt a spark ignite between us. It was the moment I realized that our relationship would never be the same. After our walk to the lake, I couldn't stop thinking about Zane. That evening marked a turning point in my feelings. Words and gestures that might have seemed insignificant to others meant so much more to me. I knew it was wrong, but my heart refused to obey my mind. The next day, sitting in the garden and sipping tea, I tried to sort out my feelings. Silence surrounded me, broken only by the sounds of nature, the chirping of birds and the rustle of light leaves. I looked at the roses that Dexter and I had planted a few years ago. They reminded me of a time when we were happy and in love. But over the years, those feelings seemed to have faded, leaving only memories. Suddenly, Zane appeared in the garden. His appearance was unexpected, but I felt my heart skip a beat with joy. He sat beside me on the wooden bench and looked into my eyes. His gaze was soft and understanding, as if he knew what was going on in my soul. "You seem thoughtful," he said, smiling slightly. I tried to smile back, but inside me, a storm of emotions raged. "Yes, I'm just reminiscing about the past," I replied, hoping he wouldn't notice my confusion. We continued talking, and once again I felt the ease and freedom I always experienced in his company. With him, I could talk about everything and nothing at the same time, and it brought me extraordinary pleasure. Soon the conversation turned to more personal topics. Zane talked about his struggles at school and how he missed the support of his parents, who were always busy with their own affairs. I understood him because I had experienced similar feelings in my youth. "You can always talk to me if you need to," I said, wanting to support him. He nodded and unexpectedly took my hand. The touch was gentle yet full of confidence. I felt a flame ignite within me, one I had been trying to suppress since his arrival. It was wrong, and I knew it, but I couldn't bring myself to pull away. "Allison," he said, looking directly into my eyes, "you're special. I've never met anyone with whom I could be so open." His words touched me to the core. I felt my defenses beginning to crumble. We sat in the garden, surrounded by silence and nature, and this moment seemed both surreal and yet so natural. I realized our relationship was crossing a line from which there would be no return. But at that moment, I couldn't think of anything except what was in front of me. Zane slowly leaned toward me, and I felt his lips touch mine. The kiss was filled with tenderness and passion that I hadn't felt in a long time. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to forget everything except this moment. The taste of his lips, the softness of his touch. Everything was so new and yet achingly familiar. I knew I had gone too far, but at that moment I didn't care. When we pulled away, I saw the same mixture of fear and admiration in his eyes that I was experiencing myself. It was more than just physical attraction. There was a connection between us that couldn't be ignored. But as soon as reality returned to me, I realized what I had done. I stood up, trying to regain my composure, and took a few steps toward the house. Zane watched me with concern and anticipation. But I didn't know what to say. "I need to think," I whispered, and without waiting for a response, I headed inside. Inside, I threw myself onto the sofa, covering my face with my hands. Shame and guilt overwhelmed me, making me ponder how far I was willing to go. I knew I had to put an end to this, but something inside me resisted that decision. In the following days, I tried to keep my distance from Zane, but it proved more difficult than I might thought. He was everywhere, in the kitchen, in the garden, in my head. Every smile, every word from him made me wonder what I was missing in my life. We exchanged glances full of emotion and expectation, but neither of us dared to talk about what had happened. Meanwhile, Dexter was absorbed in work and barely noticed the changes happening at home. I felt guilty for my feelings, but I also realized that I needed to understand myself before drawing any conclusions. One evening, while Dexter and I were having dinner, he noticed my odd behavior. "Allison, are you okay? You seem tense," he said, looking at me intently. I forced a smile and tried to assure him that everything was fine. But inside, everything was far from okay. I felt like I was at a crossroads, and every choice seemed wrong. Dexter was a good husband, but my heart had room for someone else, and that scared me. I knew I had to make a choice. It wasn't easy, but I understood that I couldn't continue living a lie. The only question was whether I had the courage to follow my feelings or would remain on a familiar yet fated path. Soon I would have to make a decision that would determine my fate. But while I was in this uncertainty in a world where the boundaries between duty and desire were blurred, I could only hope that I would choose the right path. A few weeks had passed since our first kiss, and my feelings for Zane had grown even stronger. I continued to meet with him in various parts of the house, and each time there was a tense yet pleasant atmosphere between us. Our conversations became increasingly personal, and I realized that this interaction was important to both of us. One evening, we decided to take a walk in the park near our house. It was a quiet, cozy place where we could escape our worries and simply enjoy each other's company. The sun was slowly setting on the horizon, painting the sky in warm hues, and I felt a growing sense of happiness and tranquility inside me. Zane walked beside me, his hand occasionally brushing against mine, and this simple touch made my heart beat faster. We talked about his plans for the future, how he saw his career, and I admired his ambition and determination. At his age, I couldn't boast such clarity and confidence. "I think I want to go into interior design," he said, looking at me with a light smile. "I've always loved creating coziness and beauty in spaces." I smiled back, delighted by his inspiration. "That's wonderful, Zane. You've always been a creative person, and I'm sure you'll succeed." Suddenly, he stopped and looked at me with unexpected seriousness. "Allison, you always support me. I'm so glad I can share my thoughts with you." I felt the familiar warmth of affection ignite inside me. Our relationship was gradually becoming more than just friendship, which both scared and fascinated me. I knew I had to be careful, but I couldn't bring myself to stop this interaction. Meanwhile, the atmosphere at home remained tense. Dexter was still engrossed in work, and his constant absences began to take a toll on our marriage. We communicated less frequently, and I felt an invisible wall growing between us. One evening, I decided to prepare a special dinner for Dexter, hoping to rekindle the closeness we once had. I chose his favorite dishes and tried to create a cozy atmosphere, lighting candles and playing his favorite music. When he came home, I greeted him with a smile and a kiss, trying not to show how I truly felt inside. We sat down at the table, and I tried to keep the conversation going, but his thoughts seemed to be elsewhere. "Thank you for dinner, Allison," he said, smiling slightly, but I could see that his mind was on something else. "I appreciate your care." I nodded, feeling my heart sink a little with disappointment. I knew we needed to talk, but I was afraid to broach difficult topics. Instead, I decided to do everything I could to show my love and support, hoping that, in time, everything would get better. The next day, I arranged to meet Zane at a local cafe. It was a cozy spot with the aroma of freshly baked pastries and coffee, and we often went there to chat and relax. I chose a table by the window, which offered a view of the bustling street. Zane arrived shortly after me, and I felt my nervousness melt away as soon as he appeared. He ordered our usual lattes and cinnamon rolls, and we dove into a conversation about his latest project at university. "I think I can showcase my work at a local exhibition," he said, his eyes gleaming with enthusiasm. "It would be a great opportunity to show what I'm capable of." I was genuinely happy for his successes and proud of the person he was becoming. Our conversations were always rich and engaging, and I noticed how our shared interest in art and design brought us closer together. As the evening drew to a close, I realized I was in a difficult position. There was a special attraction between Zane and me, but I couldn't forget my commitments to Dexter. I needed time to sort through my feelings and make a decision that would be fair to everyone. Returning home, I once again immersed myself in thoughts about how to change the situation. I knew I couldn't continue living a lie, but I also couldn't simply abandon feelings that were so real and deep. It was a challenging time in my life, and I felt that only time and honesty would help me find a way out of this labyrinth of emotions. A few more days passed, and I was still trying to find a balance between my responsibilities and what was happening in my heart. I knew that many trials awaited me, but I also believed I could overcome them and make the right choice. Friday evening was filled with the usual hustle and bustle. Dexter was preparing for a business trip and finishing packing his suitcases when I entered the bedroom. His suitcase lay open on the bed, filled with neatly folded clothes and papers he would use for meetings. His trip was scheduled for a week, and I knew it would be yet another marathon of work to which he was so accustomed. I approached the window, watching as the evening lights painted the street in a golden hue, and felt a slight sense of liberation. These rare weeks when Dexter was away gave me a chance to relax a bit from the constant tension in our relationship. "Are you sure you'll be okay here without me?" he asked, turning to me with a smile. "Of course, Dexter, I'll be fine," I replied, trying to put confidence into my voice. "You know, I love having the house to myself." His trips were always a topic of discussion, but this time I didn't feel the usual anxiety. On the contrary, there was some joy in the upcoming time I could spend in my routine without having to monitor every step. I knew that Zane and I would have the opportunity to enjoy each other's company in a calm setting, but I tried not to focus too much on that. After dinner, which we spent in a friendly atmosphere, Dexter continued packing, and I decided to tidy up the kitchen. As I stood at the sink, Zane approached from behind and quietly asked, "How are you?" I felt his closeness and turned to see his smiling face. "Everything's fine, just a bit tired," I replied, noting how his eyes shone with interest. "I think it's going to be an interesting week," he said, his voice calm and confident. "Yes, I think you're right," I replied, feeling excitement growing inside me. The next morning, I woke up to the soft light streaming through the curtains. Dexter was already up, making the final preparations before his trip. I heard the sound of water in the bathroom and decided to join him to make sure everything was okay. When I entered, he was already standing in front of the mirror, adjusting his business suit. His movements exuded focus and confidence, which always earned my respect. "Well, I'm ready," he said, looking at me in the mirror. "I hope the trip goes smoothly." I stepped closer and hugged him by the shoulders, trying to convey support. "Everything will be fine. You always manage." We left the house together, and I watched as he got into a taxi and drove away, leaving me on the porch with a slight sense of loneliness. But at the same time, I felt hopeful that this week would bring something new. Returning to the house, I decided to tidy up the bedroom. It still smelled of his cologne, but the room seemed empty without his presence. I put the suitcase in the corner, and then, feeling a surge of energy, headed for the shower. Hot water streamed over my body, soothing my nerves and washing away the remnants of the morning rush. I closed my eyes, immersed in my thoughts, when I suddenly heard a light knock on the door. "Ellison, are you there?" Zane's voice echoed. I flinched in surprise and reached for the towel to wrap myself. "Yes, in the shower. Is something wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Zane entered the bathroom, and I noticed his gaze slide over me before he stopped at the edge of the tub. He was in a sports t-shirt and shorts, ready for his morning run. "Sorry, I didn't mean to bother you," he said, scratching his head sheepishly. "I just wanted to ask if you'd like to take a walk together as we planned." I smiled, pleased by how he cared about our time together. "Sure, give me a couple of minutes." He nodded and turned to leave, but then stopped, his gaze meeting mine again. In his eyes was a spark that made my heart beat faster. "Zane!" He stepped closer and without hesitation hugged me, letting the towel fall to the floor. His touch was gentle and reassuring, and I felt my body relax in his embrace. "You know, Ellison, this feeling, it doesn't go away," he whispered, his voice full of emotion. I looked into his eyes and realized that something more than mere attraction had arisen between us. It was a feeling that both frightened and attracted us at the same time. He leaned in to kiss me, and I felt everything around us quiet. The kiss was long, full of tenderness and passion, and I understood that this was not just physical attraction, but something more, something deeper. When we pulled away from each other, I smiled, feeling a hope ignite within me that this week would be the beginning of something new. "Let's go for a walk," Zane suggested, stepping back to give me a chance to dress. I nodded, feeling our connection growing stronger, and understood that many challenges awaited us, but I was ready for them. The next few days passed in a cozy routine that reminded me of the importance of enjoying the simple things. Zane and I spent time outdoors, walking in the park, or just sitting on the porch with cups of hot coffee. His company was a source of comfort and joy for me, and I began to realize that our feelings were growing deeper each day. One morning, as the sun was just beginning to light up the horizon, I awoke to the sensation that someone was watching me. Opening my eyes, I saw Zane standing by the window looking at me with a tender smile. "Good morning," he said quietly, trying not to disturb the silence in the room. "Good morning," I replied, sitting up and rubbing my eyes. "Have you been up long?" He nodded, turning to me. "I just didn't want to miss this moment, when the sun rises and fills the room with light. You look so calm and beautiful at this hour." I smiled, feeling his words fill me with warmth. In his presence, I felt more confident and happier than I had in months. After breakfast, we decided to have a picnic in the backyard. I made sandwiches and salads, and Zane grabbed a blanket and drinks. We settled under a large tree, enjoying the gentle breeze and the rustling of leaves. "Have you ever thought about changing your life?" Zane asked, gazing at the clouds. I pondered his words, recalling how often I felt trapped by routine obligations and expectations. "Yes, I have. Sometimes I feel like I'm too attached to stability and afraid of change." Zane turned to me, his eyes glowing with understanding. "I think you're much braver than you seem. You deserve happiness, and maybe this week is a chance for both of us to understand what we truly want." I felt his words resonate within me, stirring excitement and hope. His support and pleased confidence helped me look to the future with optimism. After the picnic, we spent time reading books and talking, sharing stories and dreams. Time flew by unnoticed, and as the sun began to set, I realized that this day was one of the happiest of my life. In the evening, we decided to watch a movie, settling on the couch under a warm blanket. I felt Zane gently wrap his arm around me, and this touch was like balm to my soul. "Allison, I want you to know that this time has been something special for me," he said as the credits began to roll. "I didn't expect our relationship to become so close, but now I can't imagine how things will be without you." I turned to him, feeling my heart fill with gratitude and love. "Zane, I feel the same way. You've become someone special to me, and I don't want this to end." We kissed again, and this kiss was full of promises and hopes for the future we could create together. That night, as I went to sleep, I felt like I had finally found a part of myself that had been lost in the routine. The following days passed in similar harmony, and I became increasingly convinced that this week was something more than just time spent together. It opened up new horizons and opportunities that we never dared to discuss. One night, as we sat on the porch, under the stars, I dared to ask Zane about his plans for the future. "Have you thought about what will happen after this week?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Zane thought for a moment, looking at the stars. "Yes, I've thought about it, but for now, I just want to enjoy every moment with you. I don't want to rush things, but I also don't want to let you go." His words were honest and sincere, and I felt that we were on the same path, ready to explore where our feelings would lead us. When the week came to an end and Dexter returned, I felt a slight sadness, but at the same time, I understood that this week had changed many things in my life. I became more confident in my feelings and in what I truly wanted. Zane and I understood that there were still many challenges ahead, but we were ready to face them together. We realized that we had found in each other what we had been searching for so long, and we were ready to fight for it, no matter how difficult it might be. After Dexter returned, the familiar routine settled back into the house. I tried to return to the usual way of life, but deep down I knew that nothing would ever be the same. There was a connection between Zane and me that was impossible to ignore, and it made our interactions even more thrilling. We tried to behave naturally, avoiding suspicious looks and words, but in the silence, the glances we exchanged spoke more than any words. I felt his gaze on me even when we were in the same room as Dexter, and it stirred a mix of excitement and fear of being discovered. We began communicating secretly when Dexter was busy with work or out of the house. Each of our conversations became a little adventure, filled with anticipation and excitement. We met in the garden behind the house or on quiet streets, where no one could see us. Each meeting was like a new step into unknown territory. One day, when Dexter left for an important meeting, we decided to meet in a nearby park. I put on a light dress and took only my phone and keys so as not to arouse suspicion. Zane was waiting for me by the big oak tree, and when I approached, his face lit up with joy. "I thought these days would never end," he said, hugging me. I felt my heart beat faster. "I missed you too," I replied, sinking into his embrace. We walked along a path surrounded by greenery, enjoying the solitude. Every meeting was filled with anticipation, as if we were characters in a secret romance that no one should discover. We discussed our dreams and plans, trying not to think about what was happening around us. "You know, sometimes it feels like I'm living in a parallel reality," I said, stopping and looking at his face. "It's so unusual, but I'm happy when we're together." Zane nodded, taking my hand. "I feel the same way. I don't want this to end, but I understand we need to be careful." We found a secluded spot in a meadow where we could sit and talk without fear of being seen. The breeze pleasantly cooled our skin, and I felt free from all worries and anxieties. "Allison, I think I've fallen in love with you," Zane said quietly, lowering his gaze to our intertwined fingers. I felt my heart skip a beat. His confession was unexpected, but also felt so natural. I knew our feelings were growing stronger, and this moment was a revelation for me. "Zane, me too," I replied, trying to put all my sincerity into my voice. Our lips met in a gentle kiss full of promises and hopes. This kiss symbolized our connection, which had become an important part of our lives. As the sun began to set, we decided to return home to avoid suspicion. On the way back, we discussed how to behave so no one would suspect anything. "We need to be careful and not show our feelings in public," Zane said, looking into my eyes. I nodded, understanding that this game of hide-and-seek could continue for a long time, but I was willing to take the risk for the sake of our relationship. "We'll manage." The main thing is to trust each other and be honest. When we returned home, Dexter was already there, busy with his affairs. I entered the house, trying to act naturally, and felt Zane would follow me with a more neutral expression on his face. In the evening, sitting at dinner, I watched Dexter talk about his meeting. His voice was full of enthusiasm and plans, and I tried to keep the conversation going, although my thoughts were still occupied with my meetings with Zane. After dinner, I cleaned up in the kitchen, and when everyone went to bed, I sent Zane a short message to wish him good night. His response came almost immediately. "Sweet dreams, Allison." Lying in bed, I thought about how our lives had changed over the past few weeks. Each day was filled with secret meetings and conversations that had become a source of joy and inspiration for me. I knew we were walking a dangerous path, but I was ready to go all the way to preserve this feeling. The first few days after Dexter's return passed in a tense but familiar routine. Zane and I carefully acted so that no one would suspect our little secret. Every glance, touch, and word spoken in the presence of others was meticulously considered. We tried to act as usual, but our eyes always gave us away. When Dexter went to work, the house would become quiet, giving us the chance to be together, albeit for a short time. We planned our meetings so that they seemed random and inconspicuous. One such place for our secret rendezvous became a small gazebo at the far end of the garden, hidden from view by dense foliage. Here we could talk and be ourselves, even if only for a few minutes. On one such day, I decided to tidy up the garden when Zane approached me with an offer to help. We worked side by side, sometimes touching each other's hands, or exchanging quiet words that no one else was supposed to hear. Our closeness was both thrilling and frightening, but it added intensity to our relationship. After we finished working in the garden, I suggested that Zane have lemonade on the veranda. We sat on the swing, enjoying the gentle breeze that pleasantly cooled our flushed faces. "Have you ever thought about how long we can keep this up?" Zane asked, looking into the distance. I knew what he meant, and it worried me. Our relationship felt like a fragile secret that could be exposed at any moment. "I tried not to think about it," I replied, shrugging. "I just enjoy being with you, even if it's difficult." Zane looked at me with understanding. "I do too, but sometimes I feel like we need to come up with a plan in case something goes wrong." We discussed this from time to time, but we could never come to a definitive decision. Every time we were together, I realized that our connection was growing stronger, and at the same time I knew it was dangerous. The next day, we met in the park after Dexter had gone to work. It was our favorite place to walk, quiet and secluded, where we could simply enjoy each other's company. We walked along the paths, holding hands and discussing how to avoid suspicion. "Maybe we should be more cautious and meet less often," I suggested, knowing how difficult it would be for both of us. Zane shook his head. "I don't want to lose what we have. I'm willing to take risks if it means being with you." His words were full of resolve and conviction, and it warmed me. We continued walking, discussing plans for the future, dreaming of a time when we could be together without looking over our shoulders. When we returned home, Dexter was busy working in his office. I felt a sense of relief knowing that our secret meetings remained hidden for now. Zane and I decided to prepare dinner together, trying to make it seem as natural and ordinary as possible. That evening, we sat down for dinner as a family, and I watched Dexter as he talked about work. At the same time, my thoughts kept drifting back to Zane, who sat across from me, radiating calm and confidence. I knew our secret affair was becoming increasingly dangerous, but I couldn't do anything about it. As dinner came to an end, and I stayed in the kitchen cleaning up, Zane approached me, casually brushing my hand. His touch was light but significant, and I felt a shiver of excitement run through me. "Ellison, I can't stop thinking about you," he whispered, leaning closer. I looked into his eyes, filled with tenderness and determination. "I can't either, Zane, but we need to be careful. We can't afford to make a mistake." He nodded, understanding that our secret connection required constant vigilance, but in his eyes I saw a promise that he would fight for us, no matter what. And so our meetings continued, filled with caution and hidden passion. Each day became a new challenge for us, but also a new chance to prove that our feelings were truly important. We knew there were still many difficulties ahead, but we were ready to go to the end to preserve what we had. Zane was supposed to go home since his stay with us had originally been planned as temporary. He had rented an apartment in another city where he lived alone and promised me that we would stay in touch despite the distance. On the day of his departure, I felt hollow, knowing that our communication would now become even more difficult. As Zane packed his things and said his goodbyes, I tried to appear calm. Dexter, unaware of anything, warmly hugged his nephew and wished him luck. I, standing nearby, smiled, but inside I was tense at the thought of him leaving. Zane lingered a moment longer than necessary, meeting my gaze filled with promises and hopes. After he left, the house felt empty, and my relationship with Dexter seemed even more strained. I realized that we needed to spend more time together to try and regain our previous closeness. We began having dinner together more often, discussing future plans, and even going out into nature on weekends. However, despite all our efforts, I felt that something important was slipping away from us. One evening, sitting on the veranda with a glass of wine, I decided to talk to Dexter about our relationship. "Don't you notice that we've been drifting apart?" I asked cautiously, trying not to hurt his feelings. He looked at me with surprise. "I've noticed that you've become more thoughtful. Is something bothering you?" I hesitated, choosing my words. I just feel like we're talking and sharing less about what's happening in our lives. It's as if an invisible barrier has come between us. Dexter nodded in agreement. "I've noticed that too. Maybe it's just because of work and all the changes that have happened recently. I want things to be like they were before." We talked for a long time about the importance of being honest with each other and maintaining open communication. I understood that this was a step in the right direction, but inside, there was still a void that only Zane could fill. A few days later, one evening, I received a message from Zane. "Hi, Ellison, I miss you. If you can, come to me for a few days. I promise it will be unforgettable." His words sparked a flicker of hope and excitement in me. I knew it was risky, but the desire to see Zane was too strong. I considered how to explain my absence to Dexter and decided to tell him that I needed to be away for a few days on business. At dinner the next day, I started the conversation. "Dexter, I need to be away for a few days. There are urgent matters at work, and I have to be there in person." He looked at me with understanding. "Of course, I understand. I hope everything goes smoothly. If you need any help, let me know." His trust was both reassuring and guilt-inducing. I knew I was lying to him, but I convinced myself it was necessary to sort out my feelings. When the day of my departure arrived, I took a small suitcase and said goodbye to Dexter. He kissed me goodbye and wished me luck. I went to the train station with a feeling of doing something wrong, but at the same time couldn't wait to meet Zane. The journey to Zane seemed endlessly long. I imagined our reunion, wondering how things would unfold. When I finally arrived at his apartment, Zane was already waiting for me at the door. His smile lit up the entire world around me, and I knew I hadn't made a mistake in my decision. "Ellison," he said, hugging me, "I'm so glad you're here." I smiled, hugging him back. "I'm glad too. I miss this so much." We entered his apartment, and I felt all doubts and worries gradually disappear. Zane had prepared dinner, and we spent the evening talking and laughing, enjoying every moment together. His presence was like a breath of fresh air, and I felt that I could finally be myself. Our connection grew even stronger, and I realized that these days spent together would be an important milestone for us. I knew that difficulties and challenges lay ahead, but I was ready to fight for what I believed was real. When the door closed behind me, and I was alone with Zane in his apartment, the sense of reality momentarily left me. His smile, filled with tenderness and anticipation, made me forget all worries and doubts. For the first time in a long while, I felt free from the burden of guilt and deceit. Zane's apartment was cozy and minimalist, with soft colors and simple lines. The space reflected his character, straightforward, yet with depth and warmth. Photos from his travels adorned the walls, and in the corner of the living room stood an old record player with a collection of vinyl records. "Welcome to my little world," Zane said, wrapping his arms around my shoulders. "I'm glad you're here." "I am too," I replied, feeling all my anxieties retreating to the background. We sat at the table where Zane had already prepared a light dinner. He made seafood pasta, and the aroma of garlic and basil filled the room. Zane poured wine into our glasses, and we began our meal with light conversations about our plans and dreams. How long do you think we can keep this a secret? He asked, gazing into my face. I don't know, I answered honestly, shrugging. Sometimes it seems that everything would be easier, if it were all revealed, but I'm not ready to lose what we have. He nodded, understanding that our feelings were complex and contradictory. After dinner, we moved to the living room. Zane chose a jazz record and the soft melodies filled the space, creating an atmosphere of coziness and intimacy. We sat on the couch, holding each other, and discussed everything from books and movies to the travels we wanted to take together. Every word, every glance between us was filled with deep understanding and acceptance. I felt that I could be myself with him, without fear of judgment or misunderstanding. His support and confidence in our relationship gave me strength and hope. Later, we decided to watch a movie. We chose an old romantic film that always brought back warm memories. Zane spread pillows and blankets on the floor in front of the TV, and we settled into this makeshift bed, feeling like teenagers escaping adult worries. The film played in the background while we chatted and laughed softly. We exchanged jokes and discussed scenes, and then when the characters on the screen were in the midst of a romantic scene, Zane pulled me close and kissed me. The kiss was long and tender, like a promise that we were not alone in this complicated world. I felt all my anxieties and fears retreating, leaving only the two of us absorbed in each other. His hands gently caressed my face, and I in turn embraced him, trying to remember every detail of the moment. After the movie, we lay there for a long time, immersed in silence, broken only by the sound of rain outside. I felt his heart beating in sync with mine, bringing a strange sense of calm and assurance. Ellison, have you ever thought about what will happen if everything is revealed? He suddenly asked, breaking the silence. I thought for a moment before responding. I'm afraid I'll lose everyone, Dexter, family, friends. But I know I can't live without you. His arm tightened around me, and I felt him sigh, as if understanding how complicated everything was. I don't want you to lose anything, he said softly, but I know I can't give up what we have. You mean everything to me? I nodded, agreeing with his words. We both understood that our connection was something more than just a fling. It was real, and it was worth fighting for. Late at night, as I was almost falling asleep, Zane whispered gently, I'm glad you're here, Ellison. These days mean so much to me. I smiled in response, feeling his words warm my soul. Me too, Zane. I don't want this to ever end. The next day held many more moments of happiness and closeness for us. But on that night, lying in his arms, I realized I was ready to fight for us, despite all the risks and challenges that might lie ahead. In the morning of the second day, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the curtains. The room was filled with soft light, and I felt Zane's arms around me, his breathing calm and steady. I gently turned to avoid waking him and smiled as I watched him sleep. I quietly got out of bed and headed to the kitchen to make breakfast. I wanted to surprise him with something special, so I decided to prepare an omelet with avocado and fresh vegetables. The smell of coffee filled the apartment, creating a cozy atmosphere. While I was busy in the kitchen, Zane quietly approached from behind and hugged me, pressing his lips to my neck. Good morning, he whispered, making me shiver from his gentle touch. This is the best way to wake up. I turned to him, hugged him back, and kissed him. Good wanted to make us something special. We had breakfast on the balcony, enjoying the view of the city and the gentle morning breeze. Our conversation drifted between everything and nothing, as if time had stopped and nothing mattered except the two of us. After breakfast, we decided to spend the day exploring the city. We visited several galleries, tried street food, and simply walked hand in hand. Every moment was filled with joy and a sense of genuine closeness. Zane showed me his favorite spots, little parks, and hidden corners of the city that few people knew about. I felt like I was getting to know him. Even better, seeing the world through his eyes. The weather was perfect, so we decided to spend the rest of the day in the park, lying on the grass and watching the clouds. We talked about our dreams and plans, about how we would like to see our future. These conversations gave me confidence that we were not just lovers but real partners, ready to face any challenges together. In the evening, as the sun began to set, we returned to the apartment filled with impressions and happiness. I made a light dinner, and we dined by candlelight, surrounded by soft music and gentle light. After dinner, we once again settled on the couch, wrapped in each other's arms, and enjoyed the calm. Zane put on one of his favorite movies, and we, cuddled up, watched the events unfold on the screen. But soon the movie faded into the background, and we were immersed once again in our own world, full of tenderness and passion. Late at night, when we were lying, tired but content, Zane suddenly asked, "Ellison, have you ever thought about changing everything?" His question caught me off guard. "Do you mean telling Dexter everything?" I asked, trying to understand his thoughts. He nodded. "Yes, I know it's difficult, but I don't want to hide anymore. I want us to be together, truly." I sighed, realizing how complicated and risky it was. "Zane, I want that too, but I don't know how to do it without destroying everything around us." "I understand," he replied softly. "I just want you to know that I'm ready for that if you decide to take the step." His words stirred in me a desire to face the truth, but I knew it would take time and determination. I couldn't let everything fall apart all at once, but I knew that someday this moment would come. The next day we spent a few more hours together, enjoying the last moments of our little secret. We had lunch at a small cafe, talked about books and music, and simply enjoyed each other's company. When it was time to say goodbye, I felt how hard that would be to return to my old life, knowing Zane would be far away. But his farewell kiss and promise to stay in touch gave me confidence that we would manage. "I will miss you," I said, hugging him tighter than usual. "I will miss you too," he replied, stroking my back. "But this is not the end. Ellison, I believe we will find a way to be together." I nodded, knowing he was right. Those days together showed me that true love always finds a way despite all obstacles. With these thoughts, I returned home, feeling both empty and full of hope for a future that could be as bright and full of love as the days we spent together. When I came back home after those days spent with Zane, my heart was heavy. Inside, a conflict was brewing that wouldn't let me rest. I sat in the kitchen, staring out the window, reflecting on how things had gone so far. Zane had been the embodiment of those feelings I had long lost in my everyday life, but I knew it couldn't continue like this. At first I tried to ignore that inner voice, but over time, it grew louder, reminding me that I had broken the promise I made to Dexter. Every morning, I woke up with a sense of guilt that intensified as soon as I looked at Dexter, busy with his usual routines. He was kind to me as always, and I realized that he needed much more than I could offer in this state. One evening when I was alone again, I pondered what should happen next. I understood that I couldn't continue lying to Dexter and to myself. I needed to make a decision that would shape my future. These thoughts wouldn't leave me alone. I felt torn between a sense of duty and desire. On one side was my life with Dexter, stable though it had lost its former passion. On the other side was Zane, the embodiment of all my yearnings for freedom and novelty. I sat on the couch for a long time, trying to sort through my feelings. I remembered the moments I had shared with Dexter, how we first met, our joint travels, quiet evenings at home. These were memories that warmed my soul despite all the difficulties. On the other hand, Zane was my new beginning, the person who had awakened long-forgotten emotions in me. But I knew our future was murky and uncertain. It was a game with fire that I could no longer afford to play. Finally, I realized that I couldn't continue living this way. The decision I had to make seemed inevitable. I knew I had to end things with Zane if I wanted to preserve my family, and attempt to restore what was between Dexter and me. My heart ached at the thought of what I had to do, but I understood that it was the only path to honesty and inner peace. With these thoughts, I sat down at the table and wrote Zane a message, trying to pour all the feelings that overwhelmed me into it. "Zane," I began, my fingers trembling over the keyboard. "I need to say that our relationship can't continue. I'm grateful to you for everything, for the moments we shared, for the feelings you stirred in me. But I understand that I need to try to restore what I have with Dexter." I sat there for a long time staring at the screen before sending the message. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but I knew it was the right decision. I could no longer live in lies and deceit, even if it meant letting go of the happy moments I had experienced with Zane. I sent the message and felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was the first step toward honesty and restoring my inner world. I knew a long and difficult road lay ahead, but now I had a goal. When Dexter came home, I tried to act naturally, but inside a storm was raging. I knew I couldn't fix everything immediately, but I was ready to do everything possible to bring our relationship back to what it once was. Now that I had taken the first step, all that remained was to move forward and hope that I had the strength and resolve to handle this challenge. For a long time, I thought about how to continue living with this lie. My guilt became unbearable, and I realized that I could no longer deceive Dexter. Every morning, waking up next to him, I felt the chasm growing inside me that separated us from each other. I knew I had to tell him the truth, even if it meant the end of our relationship. That evening, when I finally made up my mind, I felt my heart pounding wildly in my chest. I meticulously considered each word, trying to find the right phrases that could convey the depth of my remorse. I hoped he could understand and forgive me, but deep down I knew it was unlikely. When Dexter came home from work, I asked him to sit down at the table and talk. He seemed to sense something was wrong, as his gaze was wary. I didn't know how to start the conversation, and for a few minutes we sat in silence. Finally, summoning all my strength, I began. "Dexter, I need to tell you something. It's important, and I ask you to listen to me until the end." He nodded, his eyes filled with anticipation and anxiety. "Recently I've made many mistakes," I continued, trying not to show how my hands were trembling. "I did something I should never have done. I had an affair." I saw his face tense up and his gaze turned cold. "With whom?" he asked, his voice sounding as if he feared the answer. I took a deep breath, gathering my courage, and quietly said, "With Zane." A heavy silence fell over the room. I watched Dexter's face fill with shock and disbelief. His face grew grim, and I noticed his fists whiten as he clenched them. "You're saying you slept with my nephew?" His voice was filled with rage and pain. "How could you?" I lowered my head, feeling tears well up in my eyes. "I can't explain why it happened," I said, struggling to hold back the tears. "But I'm sorry. I want to make things right if you let me." But his face remained implacable. "You think you can just say sorry and everything will be okay?" He stood up, pushing his chair back so abruptly that it nearly fell. "I'll never be able to forgive you for this. You betrayed me and destroyed our family." His words were like a knife to my heart. I knew he was right, and it only deepened my guilt. I had lost everything, his trust, his love, and what we had built together. "Please give me a chance to fix this," I pleaded. But I could see that my words had no impact. "No, Allison," he shook his head, his voice firm and unyielding. "I don't want to see you anymore. Pack your things and leave. Leave my home forever." I knew it was the end. He was resolute, and I couldn't blame him. I stood up, still trying to comprehend what had happened, and began packing my belongings, unable to stop the flow of tears that clouded my vision. Each item I placed into the suitcase felt like a piece of my former life that I had lost. I felt my hopes shattering, leaving only pain and emptiness. As I left, Dexter stood in the doorway, his gaze cold and detached. I tried to look into his eyes, but he turned away as if I were a stranger. "I am truly sorry," I whispered, but his silence was louder than any words. I closed the door, feeling my life crumble into pieces. Now I had to deal with the consequences of my actions and try to find a way to move forward, without anything that I once valued. After I left, silence enveloped me. It was the silence of solitude and loss, a silence filled with thoughts about how I ended up in this situation. I rented a small apartment in the city center, and in the first days after the breakup with Dexter, it felt as if the walls were closing in around me. I felt lost and helpless. From morning until night, I sat on the couch staring at a fixed point, replaying the events of the past few months over and over in my mind. My thoughts returned to how everything began with Zane, and how I could have prevented it if I had made a different choice. I cursed myself for my weakness and for destroying my family over a fleeting affair. Each day it became harder to cope with the inner emptiness and guilt. I realized that Dexter would never forgive me, and this was the most painful realization of all. A few days after my move, I received a notice from Dexter's lawyer. He had filed for divorce. My heart clenched with pain again when I saw the papers. It was another blow, confirming the end of our life together. I knew he was right. After everything I had done, he had no choice but to sever all ties with me. But this realization did not ease my pain. I had lost not only a husband, but also a best friend, someone who had been with me through joy and sorrow. Those days were filled with loneliness and melancholy. I tried not to show my pain, but it haunted me at every turn. I struggled to adjust to life without Dexter, to a life where I had to face all the difficulties alone. I tried to find solace in work, immersing myself in it to forget, even if just for a while. But even there, memories pursued me. Every moment I was alone, my thoughts returned to Dexter and Zane, to what I had lost and what I could never regain. I avoided calls and messages from friends and family. I couldn't bear their pity and judgment. I was ashamed of what I had done, and I didn't know how to explain my actions, even to myself. One evening, as I sat with a cup of tea in my tiny kitchen, I suddenly realized that I could no longer live in this state. I had to find a way to move forward, to rebuild my life, even if it seemed impossible. I couldn't allow myself to wallow in self-pity. I decided to seek help from a therapist. I knew I needed to work through my feelings and actions to cope with the consequences. The first sessions were difficult. I didn't want to admit to myself that I had destroyed my life through my own foolishness and selfishness. But gradually, step by step, I began to realize that I needed to forgive myself if I wanted to move on. I couldn't bring Dexter back or change the past, but I could try to learn how to live with myself and my choices. I also understood that I needed to be honest with myself. I had to stop running away from my problems and learn to deal with them. It was a long and difficult road, but I was ready to walk it. Over time, I began to find the strength to continue living. I started reconnecting with friends and family, slowly sharing what had happened. I knew I couldn't recover the past, but I hoped that in time I could build a new life based on honesty and self-understanding. Each day, I took a step toward a new reality, hoping that one day I could leave my mistakes behind and find my place in the world. It wasn't easy, but I knew I had no other choice. As time went by, I gradually adjusted to my new life. Each day, I tried to find the strength to move forward, leaving the past behind. It wasn't easy, but with each passing week, I felt my confidence returning. Sessions with my therapist helped me sort out my feelings. I began to understand that I was wrong to hope that someone else could fix my mistakes. Only I could do that. I learned to accept my weaknesses and understand that everyone makes mistakes. What mattered was not what I had done, but how I chose to deal with the consequences. I started exercising again, which helped me distract myself and regain my inner balance. Morning runs became not only a physical release, but also a time for reflection. I learned to find joy in simple things, fresh air walks, reading books, and meeting with friends. Work also provided solace. My colleagues supported me, and I was grateful for their understanding. Gradually, I began taking on new projects, which helped me feel more confident. I realized that I could achieve a lot if I worked hard and believed in myself. One day, while sorting through old belongings, I came across a photo album full of pictures with Dexter. These were memories of the best moments of our lives. Instead of throwing it away, I decided to keep the album. I understood that these memories were a part of my life, and they would always be with me. I also thought about Zane. How was he doing? We hadn't spoken since I ended our relationship, but I hoped he had found his own happiness. I didn't blame him for what happened, as each of us made our own choices. I just hoped that he had learned from his mistakes, as I had from mine. In the end, I realized that the most important thing was to be honest with myself and value those around me. Life went on, and I was ready to accept it as it was with all its ups and downs. Don't destroy your life and family for fleeting passions. Be honest with yourself and those you love. Cherish those who are close to you, and don't take their presence for granted. Mistakes can have devastating consequences, and what seems insignificant today can turn into pain and loss tomorrow. If you find yourself in a difficult situation, try to pause and consider how your actions will affect your future and those around you. Be open to dialogue and strive to solve problems together rather than running away from them. I destroyed my family and hurt someone who was dear to me, and now I live with the consequences of my mistakes. I hope my experience helps you avoid similar situations and makes your life happier and more harmonious. Take care of your loved ones and always remember that true happiness comes through honesty, trust, and mutual understanding.